Mornings in Amherst always start the same way. I wake up at 6 when the first rays of sunlight are just beginning to break through the blinds. The big house on Maple Street has long since become too spacious for one person, but I can't bring myself to move. Every corner here holds memories of Vivian. My name is Almir Shringwood. I'm 68 years old, and I've been living alone for the past 3 years. Sometimes I think that loneliness was in this house long before Vivian died. It came with misunderstandings, cold stares from my daughter and son-in-law, awkward family dinners ending in quiet arguments in the kitchen. The morning ritual hasn't changed for years. A cup of strong tea, toast with blackcurrant jam, and a fresh newspaper. The world is changing. Everyone is moving to electronic news, but I remain faithful to paper, to typography, to the rustle of pages. Perhaps Loris is right, and I am indeed hopelessly out of date. Thinking of my daughter, I reach for the photograph on the mantelpiece. Loris in her graduation gown, with her law degree, proud, confident. Next to her, Vivian and I, still young, still happy. It seemed to us then that it would always be that way. Vivian and I started out as a small family restaurant in downtown Amherst. Amberley's was the name my wife suggested, in keeping with the name of the town. Back then, we had 8 tables and a tiny kitchen. I cooked, she welcomed guests. We put our hearts into every dish, every detail of the interior. Loris grew up amid the smells of fresh baked goods and clinking dishes, the laughter of regular customers and warm conversations behind closed doors after hours. She never shared our passion. "The restaurant business is unreliable, Dad," she used to say as a teenager. "I need stability, a career." I couldn't blame her. Everyone chooses their own path. But something snapped between us when she left to study in another city and met Toby. Toby Shringwood, a successful financial analyst, had looked at me and Vivian as people from another world from day one. He never said it outright, but I could see it in his gaze, in the way he wrinkled his nose when tasting our food, in the way he politely but insistently refused to discuss the restaurant. "How are you doing?" came out of his mouth as a formality rather than genuine interest. When Byrne was born, Vivian and I hoped our grandson would be a bridge between us and Loris. For a while it had been so. Little Byrne watched with delight as I juggled apples in the kitchen, as I created fanciful figures out of mastic for cakes. He loved to help me knead dough with his little hands and proudly presented Chef Byrne's cookies to guests. That all changed when he turned 12. Toby got a promotion and they moved to Boston. Visits became infrequent, short, filled with polite smiles and conversations about the weather. I watched Loris and Toby gradually mold Baron into their counterpart, an ambitious, pragmatic young man for whom cooking was nothing more than a retirement hobby. By then, Amberley's had become one of Amherst's most successful restaurants. We expanded, opened a second location, and hired a talented chef, Erwin Fentress, when I could no longer handle everything myself. Business was booming, but Loris was never interested in our success. In her eyes, I was just the owner of a small restaurant that was somehow still afloat. Vivian died suddenly. A stroke took her in a matter of hours. Loris flew to the funeral, stayed 3 days and left, leaving me alone with an empty house and a pile of memories. "Dad, you need to move on," she said before she left. "Maybe you should sell the restaurant. At your age, it's time for a vacation." But Amberley's was the last thing that connected me to Vivian. Not only did I not sell it, but I put everything I had into growing it. I opened a pastry shop, organized the supply of our baked goods to the best cafes in the city, launched a catering service. Work helped me not to think about the emptiness that filled the house. I hardly ever told Loris about it. She wasn't interested anyway, and I didn't want to look like I was bragging or asking for recognition. Byrne grew up, graduated from a prestigious university, got a job at a consulting firm. He called occasionally on holidays, sent birthday cards. One day he sent a picture, he and a beautiful blonde girl against the ocean. "This is Merritt, my fiancée," the caption read. They had their wedding in Boston, small and elegant. I attended, sitting in the second row, smiling and applauding in all the right places. Merritt was polite but cold. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Shringwood," she said, and immediately turned away to the other guests. I stare at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My wrinkles have gotten deeper, my hair almost completely grayed. My clothes hang looser on me than before. Since Vivian's death, I've lost my appetite for my own food. It's ironic for a chef. A phone call catches me off guard. A name I rarely see pops up on the screen. Burn. My heart involuntarily quickens its rhythm. Grandpa, it's me, Burn. His voice sounds unusually soft, almost tentative. The last time we spoke was at Christmas, brief and formal. Bjarni, it's good to hear from you. How are you? How's Merritt? We're fine, thanks. Listen, Grandpa, Merritt and I are coming to Amherst for a few days. I was thinking maybe we could have dinner together. The three of us. I can't hide my surprise. Burns never suggested anything like this before. Of course, I'd love to. When are you coming? Thursday. Merritt wants to check out some new restaurant downtown. Amberley's, I think. Have you heard of it? My heart skips a beat. They don't know. Of course they don't know. I've never told them about the growth of the business. That Amberley's is now known far beyond Amherst. Yes, I've heard, I answer after a pause. It's a nice place. Great. Thursday night, 7 o'clock? I've already made a reservation. 7. I'll be there. After the call, I sit in the chair for a long time, looking at Vivian's picture. What would she say now? She'd probably tell me to tell them the truth. But something stops me. Maybe a desire to see their sincere reactions when they find out. Maybe silly, senile pride. 2 days later, I go to the restaurant to check the reservation. Paxton Waverly, our best waiter, meets me at the entrance. Mr. Shringwood, good afternoon. We weren't expecting you today. Paxton, there's a reservation for Thursday under the name of Burn Shringwood, 7 p.m. That's my grandson. He doesn't know I'm the owner. I'd like to make it look natural. Paxton nods understandingly. Of course, sir. We'll have your usual table ready. Anything special for the menu? I shake my head. Let it be business as usual. I want them to see Amberley's the way all the guests see it. Walking back home, I feel a strange excitement. For the first time in a long time, the upcoming family dinner gives me not anxiety, but an almost childlike anticipation. Perhaps Byrne will finally see and understand what has always been important to Vivian and me. Perhaps something will change. In the evening, I go through old photo albums. Here's Loris holding newborn Byrne in his arms. Here's Vivian and me with little Byrne at a picnic by the lake. Here's his first day of school. How far away these moments seem. In the bedroom, I pull my best suit out of the closet. It's a little loose, but it still fits well enough. Vivian always said this shade of gray accentuates the color of my eyes. I wonder if Byrne will notice that it's the same suit I wore to his prom. Would he notice anything at all? As I go to bed, I realize that for the first time in a long time, I'm looking forward to a new day. Whatever happens Thursday night will be a step towards something new. For better or worse, time will tell. On Thursday, I woke up long before my alarm clock rang. There was still a pre-dawn gloom outside the window, and I was already sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, going over the day ahead in my head. Family reunions always gave me mixed feelings, a mixture of hope and anxiety, anticipation and apathy. This one was no exception, but added to the usual emotions was the odd piquancy of the situation. They didn't know that Amberley's was my restaurant. After packing up, I decided to go to the restaurant early. Even though the day-to-day business had long been run by Erwin Fentress, I tried to be there every day. Not out of disbelief, Erwin was not just a chef, but a true friend, one of the few who had remained close after Vivian's death. It's just that Amberley's was not just a business, but a part of my life, a part of myself. Amherst woke up slowly. Driving down familiar streets, I caught myself thinking that the town was changing, and I was staying the same. New buildings among the old Victorian houses, trendy signs next to traditional shops. A combination of times that made Amherst so special. Amberley's is nestled in the heart of town, in a 3-story red brick building. It had once been an old bookstore that Vivian and I had completely remodeled, keeping only the facade. The heavy wooden doors, the large windows with stained glass inserts, the sign with elegant gold letters, all of it had been thought out by us. Looking at the restaurant now, I saw not only a successful business, but the fulfillment of our shared dream. At this time of day, the restaurant was not yet open, but the staff was already starting to prepare for dinner. I entered through the back door with a nod to the security guard. The kitchen was bustling with work. The assistant chefs were chopping vegetables, preparing sauces, whipping dough. The aromas of fresh herbs, roasted garlic, and warm bread wafted through the air. Irwin stood at the stove, checking the consistency of the sauce. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a red beard and perpetually disheveled hair, he looked more like a lumberjack than a fine chef, but his hands worked wonders. "Almir," he smiled when he saw me. "I didn't expect you so early." "I couldn't sleep," I shook his hand. "How are the preparations for dinner going?" "All according to plan. The delivery from Ridge Farms came in on time. The veal's great, and I have an idea for tonight's special." We went into his small office, filled with cookbooks and recipe folders. Here, behind the old oak desk, all our menus and specials were born. "I'm thinking of veal with herbs and truffle sauce." Irwin laid out the notes in front of him. "With seasonal vegetables and mashed potatoes with rosemary. Simple but elegant." I nodded, imagining the flavor combination. "It sounds great. But let's add some sourness, maybe some pickled wild berries as a garnish." Irwin slammed his palm on the table. "Exactly. I knew something was missing. This contrast would be perfect." We discussed the details for a while longer, then moved on to general restaurant operations. Amberley's had long since grown from a small, family-run establishment into a serious restaurant complex. In addition to the main dining room, we had a wine cellar for tastings, a banquet room for events, and a small pastry shop. "Are there a lot of reservations for the weekend?" I asked, looking at the reports. "A full house for Friday and Saturday," Irwin showed me the list on the clipboard, "and 3 requests for banquets next month." "Oh, and the Culinary Review called, wanting to do an article on us." I couldn't help but smile. Culinary Review was the most prestigious gastronomic magazine in the region. Publication there meant recognition on a whole new level. "Wow," I muttered. "Who would have thought 30 years ago, when we were just starting out?" "Vivian would have been proud," Irwin said quietly. "He'd known us from the beginning. He'd come to work as a cook's helper in the old Amberleys, with 8 tables and a tiny kitchen. Vivian recognized his talent and took him under her wing. After she died, it was Irwin who became my mainstay." "Yes, he would have been," I nodded, pushing away the sudden sadness. "Speaking of reservations, my grandson and his wife are coming tonight. A table in the name of Bern Shringwood." Irwin raised his eyebrows. "Your grandson? Does he know it's your restaurant?" "No," I shook my head. "Neither he nor his wife know. To them, I'm just an old man who used to run a little restaurant." "And you're not going to tell them?" I wondered. It was a question that had been plaguing me ever since Bern called. "I don't. Part of me wants to see their reaction when they find out. The other part," I sigh, "I don't want them to suddenly take an interest in me just because of the restaurant's success." Irwin nodded understandingly. "Is it still difficult with your daughter?" "Loris and I have very little contact. Since Vivian died, it's gotten worse. She thinks I'm clinging to the past, not wanting to move on. To her, Amberley is just a reminder that I refuse to grow up and accept reality." "What a load of crap," Irwin snorted. "Ah, you've built a successful business from scratch. You're employing 30 people. You're creating something beautiful. What's immature about that?" I shrugged. Explaining Loris's logic was useless. I'd been trying for years. "Anyway, I want tonight to go well. Paxton already knows what to do. It's just a normal evening at the restaurant." We finished our business and I decided to walk around the restaurant. The main room was a large room with high ceilings and large windows, dark wood tables, soft burgundy-colored armchairs, white tablecloths, candles in silver candlesticks. Everything created an atmosphere of elegant luxury, but without pomp. There was a marble bar counter along one wall and a glass display case along the other, showcasing our specialty desserts. In the center of the room stood my favorite grand piano. We had live music on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights. I ran my hand over the polished surface of the table. Even after 3 years, I sometimes expected to see Vivian greeting guests at the front door with her unfailing warm smile and perfect posture. She was the soul of Amberley's, the one who created the special atmosphere that kept people coming back again and again. "Mr. Shringwood?" I turned around. At the door stood Paxton Waverly, our head waiter, a tall, trim young man with impeccable manners and an amazing memory for the faces and preferences of the guests. "Good morning, Paxton." "Good morning, sir. I just wanted to confirm the details of the evening. What time do you plan to arrive?" "About 15 minutes before the appointed time, I think. I want to be there when they arrive." "I see, sir. You want me to pretend I don't know you?" I'm thinking. That was a good question. "No, Paxton, just act normal. If they don't figure out who I am, so be it. If they do, well, that's fate." Paxton nodded and left, and I wandered around the room a little longer, remembering how it had started. Then I went into the kitchen to say goodbye to Irwin and went home to get ready for the evening. The day dragged painfully slow. I tried to occupy myself with the usual chores, reading the morning paper, watering the plants in the backyard, going over the bills, but my thoughts kept returning to the dinner to come. I hadn't seen Byrne in almost a year, and I knew his wife Merritt only from photos and a brief encounter at a wedding. Byrne was always a special kid, sensitive, observant, with a lively mind and a kind heart. He inherited my cooking skills and my mom's love of music. As a child, he could sit for hours in the Amberley kitchen watching me cook, asking endless questions about spices and techniques. When he turned 8, I gave him his first chef's knife. Kid safe, safe but real. He was so proud. What happened to that boy? When did his passion for cooking give way to dry talk about investments and career advancement? When the genuine interest in his eyes was replaced by polite detachment. Loris and Toby, of course. They'd always seen my work as something frivolous, temporary. "Dad, you could have accomplished so much more with your intelligence," Loris used to say. "There's no stability in the restaurant business, no prospects for growth," Toby echoed her. They wanted a real career for Byrne. Finance, law, medicine. I wonder what they would say now that Amberley's is one of the top 10 restaurants in New England, that we have franchise offers in Boston and New York, that our annual turnover. I cut the thought short. Money had never been the most important thing to Vivian and me. We wanted to create a place where people could not just eat, but have a real gastronomic experience, feel care and attention to detail. If Loris and Toby couldn't understand it then, they're unlikely to understand it now, even after seeing the numbers. And Merritt? What did I know about her? Almost nothing. Byrne had met her in grad school. She studied marketing. He studied finance. She looked spectacular in her photos. Long blonde hair, flawless makeup, fashionable clothes. At the wedding, she was polite but cold. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Shringwood," she said, and immediately turned away to the other guests. I wondered what Byrne had told her about me. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I started getting ready to go out. I showered, shaved thoroughly, put on my best suit, a dark blue suit with a vest that Vivian and I had bought in London on our last trip together. She always said that color accentuated my eyes. I chose a simple, pinstripe tie, no frills but elegant. The cufflinks were silver with small sapphires, a gift from Vivian for our 30th wedding anniversary. Looking in the mirror, I saw an older man with gray hair and wrinkles around his eyes, but still a straight back in a clear gaze. What will Byrne and Merritt see? An old man who clings to the past, or a man who, despite his losses, had found the strength to move on? At 7:30, I left the house. The evening was warm, with a light breeze bringing the smell of blossoming linden trees. I decided to walk. It was only a 15-minute walk from the house to the restaurant, and the movement helped calm my nerves. Amherst was transforming as evening fell. The streetlights came on, the storefronts glowed with warm light, and couples and groups of friends appeared on the streets, heading to restaurants and bars. I always liked this atmosphere, calm but full of life. As I passed the old clock tower, I remembered how Vivian and I used to walk here after the restaurant closed, tired but happy, discussing the day and making plans for the future. Now I was walking alone, and the conversation had to be with her ghost in my head. "What should I tell them, Vivian?" I mentally asked. "How do I explain that Amberley's isn't just a business, but our life, our legacy?" There was no answer, of course, only the sound of the wind in the tree crowns and the distant chime of the clock striking 7:15. I approached the Amberleys from across the street, stopping to admire the view. The building looked especially beautiful in the evening light. The old brick, the large stained glass windows, the elegant sign. The lights were already burning inside, creating a warm glow visible from the outside. A young valet in uniform stood at the entrance, ready to greet guests. Through the windows, I could see that the hall was nearly full. Thursday was one of the busiest days. Many people came to hear the live music. I wondered if Byrne and Merritt would like it. Would they appreciate the atmosphere we've created over the years? I crossed the street and entered the restaurant with a nod to the valet. I was greeted in the lobby by Elena, our hostess, a young woman with a warm smile and impeccable manners. "Good evening, Mr. Shringwood," she bowed slightly. "Your table is ready." "Thank you, Helena. Have my guests arrived yet?" "No, sir, but we expect them any minute." I made my way into the lounge. My usual table was in the corner, overlooking the entire restaurant, but still secluded enough for quiet conversation. Today it had a small sign on it that read, "Reserved for Mr. Shringwood." I sat down, spread my napkin on my lap, and looked at the clock. It was 10 to 7. They should have been here any minute. My heart beat faster with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. What would this evening bring? A rapprochement with his grandson, or more estrangement? A new beginning or a final breakup? I sat at a table watching the entrance and trying to calm my nerves. The restaurant was slowly filling up. Quiet jazz music was playing, and waiters glided between tables serving food and drinks. I noted with satisfaction how well our team worked together. Every movement was precise, every smile sincere. Vivian and I had been creating this atmosphere for years, and now it had a life of its own, even without our direct participation. At exactly 7 o'clock, the door opened and I saw them. Byrne looked exactly as he had in the last pictures. Tall, trim, with a short haircut and a serious expression. He was wearing an impeccably tailored dark gray suit that I could only assume had cost more than $1,000. Next to him was Merritt, a slender blonde in a tight black dress with perfect hair and makeup. They looked like a couple from the cover of a business magazine. Successful, confident, flawless. Elena met them at the entrance, checked their reservations, and began to lead them to my table. I noticed Byrne looking around, clearly impressed by the interior. Merritt, on the other hand, seemed to be sizing up the crowd. Her gaze slid over the other guests, lingering on their clothes and jewelry. As they approached, I stood up, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and uncertainty. Byrne noticed me and smiled slightly. That polite, reserved smile one usually gives to people one doesn't know very well. "Grandfather?" He held out his hand for a handshake. "It's good to see you." I shook his hand, noting how formal it seemed. No hug, no real warmth. "Byrne, it's good to see you too." I shifted my gaze to his companion. "Merritt, it's nice to meet you again." She feigned a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Mr. Shringwood?" Her handshake was light, almost insensible. We sat down at the table. Helena handed us menus and left, promising that the waiter would be along shortly. "It's a beautiful place," Byrne said, looking around. "Have you been here before?" "From time to time," I answered evasively. "How was your trip?" "Without incident." Byrne opened the menu. "We're staying at the Amherst Inn. We plan to stay until Sunday. Merritt has a meeting with a potential client here." "Yeah, I do marketing consulting," Merritt explained, keeping her eyes on the menu. "A local company wants to rebrand." "Sounds interesting." I tried to keep the conversation going. "What's the business area?" "Organic cosmetics," she finally looked at me. "But I don't think you're interested in that, Mr. Shringwood." I could hear the condescension in her tone, but I decided to ignore it. "In fact, I've always been interested in new lines of business. Organic products are becoming more and more popular these days." She raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised that the old man knew the current trends. A waiter approached us, not Paxton, but a young man named Riley, whom we had recently hired. He introduced himself, talked about the specialties and specials of the day, and wrote down the drink order. Byrne chose whiskey, Merritt chose white wine, and I chose just water with lemon. When Riley left, Byrne asked, "How's your health, Grandpa? Mom said you were having trouble with your blood pressure." "Nothing serious." I waved my hand. "The doctor prescribed pills and diet. Everything's under control. You need to take care of yourself." His tone was almost fatherly, which amused me a little. A grandson taking care of his grandfather like a child. At your age, your health is the most important thing. Believe me, I'm perfectly fine. How's your job? Are you still with the same firm? Yeah, Brighton Consulting. I just got promoted to senior analyst. Congratulations. I was genuinely proud of his success, even if his career was far from my idea of a happy life. Your parents must be very proud. They've always supported my career path. I heard a subtle jab in those words. Unlike you, Grandpa, who wanted me to become a chef. Merritt, having finished studying the menu, closed it and set it aside. Byrne recently received an offer from McKinsey's, she said proudly. We're still weighing our options, but it's a big step forward. McKinsey? I was impressed. Even I knew it was one of the most prestigious consulting firms in the world. This is really great, Byrne. Nothing has been decided yet? He looked a little embarrassed that Merritt had revealed this information. But yes, it's an interesting opportunity. Riley came back with our drinks and we ordered. Byrne chose the steak, Merritt chose the salmon with vegetables, and I chose the specialty veal with truffle sauce that Irwin had come up with tonight. After the waiter left, the conversation continued. We talked about the weather, about politics, about the news, about everything and nothing at the same time. A superficial conversation in which everyone was afraid to touch on something personal, something real. Byrne talked about his trip to Japan, a business trip, but with time for sightseeing. Merritt mentioned plans to buy a new apartment in Boston, closer to the financial center. I listened, nodded, asked questions, but felt a growing gap between us, as if we were speaking different languages. When the appetizers arrived, I tried to turn the conversation to something more personal. Byrne, do you remember the lasagna we made when you were 8? You insisted on adding chocolate to the sauce because you'd heard somewhere that they did that in Mexico. Byrne smiled slightly, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. Yeah, I remember something like that. That must have been a terrible lasagna. No, it wasn't. It was, unusual, but quite edible. You've always had a talent for experimentation. Merritt snorted. Byrne and cooking? Don't make me laugh. He can't even make scrambled eggs without my help. That's true. Byrne shrugged his shoulders. I don't have any culinary talents. But you liked to cook when you were a kid, I insisted. You could sit in the kitchen for hours watching me work. Childhood hobbies, he dismissed me. I wanted to be an astronaut or a fireman. Merritt sipped her wine and looked at me with an appraising gaze. Byrne told me that you ran a small restaurant? Yes, with my wife. I nodded. Amberley's. She looked around, as if only now noticing the name of the restaurant. What a coincidence. Her tone was condescending. Amberley's, too. Yeah, that's funny, I smiled, deciding not to reveal my cards just yet. What happened to your restaurant? She asked. After my wife died, I decided to keep it going. Oh, so you're still working? I could hear the surprise in her voice. At your age? I don't think age is a reason to give up what you love, I said calmly. Sure, if it's just a hobby, she shrugged. Sure, but the serious restaurant business requires a lot of energy and up-to-date knowledge. I saw Bjarne wince slightly at her words, but he remained silent. Apparently, this behavior of his wife was usual for him. The main courses arrived, and for a while the conversation died down. I watched Merritt scrutinize her portion before tasting it. Byrne began eating with visible pleasure. Great, he said after the first bite of steak. Really great restaurant. Not bad, Merritt agreed, though I noticed that she liked it too. There are better places in Boston, though. Like what? I couldn't resist asking. Aquitaine, Maritime, Sorellina, she listed. Places with really exquisite cuisine and the right crowd. I held back a smile. Amberley's was regularly in the same rankings as the restaurants she named, and some critics ranked us even higher. Have you ever been to these places, Grandpa? Byrne asked. A few, I replied evasively. All of them are worthy. Merritt looked me over with an appraising gaze, lingering on my suit. Though it was tailored from a fine fabric, the cut was conservative, not up to date. You might want to update your closet before you go to places like this, she said. First impressions are very important. Byrne looked embarrassed. Merritt, please. What? I'm just giving advice, she smiled innocently. Mr. Shringwood, no offense, but your suit looks like you bought it last century. Actually, I bought it in London 5 years ago. I replied calmly. On Savile Row. She looked surprised. Savile Row? The suits there cost a fortune. It was a gift from my wife for our last anniversary. Merritt looked at me appraisingly, as if reconsidering her opinion. And yet, she continued after a pause, in a place like this, you have to look appropriate. Look at the other visitors. I looked around. The crowd was indeed well-dressed. Business suits, evening gowns, expensive accessories. I think I look pretty decent, I said. Decent, yes, Merritt agreed, but not presentable. There's a certain code in elite establishments, you know? It's important for people to see that they are among equals. Bjarne looked increasingly uncomfortable. Merritt, let's talk about something else. I'm just trying to help. She put her hand on his forearm. Your grandfather obviously doesn't come to places like this very often. I don't want him to feel uncomfortable. I feel quite comfortable. Thank you for your concern, I replied, trying to remain calm. Merritt glanced at my portion. Still a strange choice for someone your age. Veal with truffles. It's quite a heavy dish. Merritt. Bjarne was no longer hiding his irritation. What? She shrugged. I care about his health. At his age, you have to watch your diet. I was beginning to understand why Byrne was so tense. His wife seemed to feel it was her duty to comment on every aspect of my life, from my clothes to my food choices. You know, Merritt continued, sipping her wine, if you can't afford places like this, we could have dinner somewhere simpler. There's a great family-owned pizzeria on the corner. There it is. Such direct rudeness took my breath away. Merritt, Byrne almost shrieked. Apologize right now. For what? She looked genuinely surprised. I'm just offering an option. Not everyone can afford to dine at a restaurant like this on their retirement. My grandfather didn't. It's okay, Byrne, I interrupted him. Your wife is just looking out for my financial well-being. Exactly, Merritt nodded, clearly not catching the sarcasm. You know, Mr. Shringwood, there's no shame in admitting your limitations. At your age and with your background running a small restaurant is not something that brings in a lot of money. I stared at her, wondering how a person could be so tactless. Byrne looked like he wanted to fall through the ground. Merritt, please stop, he asked quietly. All right, she raised her hands in feigned surrender. I just wanted to say that we can pay the bill. It's not a problem. I inhaled and exhaled slowly, trying to stay calm. I wanted to reveal my cards immediately, to show her how wrong she was. But something was holding me back, perhaps a desire to see how far she'd go. That's very generous of you, I replied, keeping my expression neutral. Merritt, clearly mistaking my calmness for humility, continued. And you know, if you need financial help, you can always come to us. Byrne earns enough to support his family. Byrne looked shocked. Merritt, my grandfather never asked us for money. Of course not, she patted his hand. He has his pride. But Mr. Shringwood, seriously, if you need help, with bills or medicine or anything else, just say the word. It's not charity, it's family support. I looked at Byrne. He looked completely crushed, clearly not knowing how to stop his wife. Thank you, Merritt, I said with a slight smile. I'll remember your offer. She seemed pleased with my answer and went back to her salmon. Byrne threw me an apologetic look, but I shook my head slightly, letting her know it was okay. We continued our dinner in relative silence. I noticed Merritt's gaze occasionally dwelled on the other diners, especially the well-dressed women with expensive jewelry. It was obvious that she was interested in who these people were, what position they held. When we had finished our main courses, a new waiter came to the table. This time it was Paxton Waverly. Good evening, he bowed elegantly. Was everything all right? Did you enjoy your meal? Everything is fine, thank you, Byrne replied. Merritt simply nodded, looking at Paxton appraisingly. Would you like dessert? He asked. We have a special today. Chocolate fondue with raspberry sauce and homemade vanilla ice cream. Sounds like fun, I said. I'll have the fondue and coffee, please. I'll have the same, Byrne nodded. Just coffee for me, Merritt said. Decaf. Paxton wrote down the order and turned to me before he left. Mr. Shringwood, the chef asks if you'd like to come into the kitchen after dinner. He would like to discuss the new menu with you. I saw Merritt's eyes widen in surprise. Of course, Paxton, I answered calmly. Tell Irwin I'll be sure to stop by. When Paxton left, Merritt leaned across the table toward me. Did he call you by name? Do you know the waiter? Yes, we've met, I smiled. And the chef, too? Her voice got higher with surprise. Irwin. Yes, we're longtime friends. Byrne looked confused. Grandpa, you didn't say you knew people from this restaurant. You didn't ask, I shrugged. Merritt shifted her gaze from me to Barron and back again. I don't understand. Why would a chef discuss the menu with you? At that moment, Elena, the hostess, approached our table. Mr. Shringwood, she addressed me respectfully. I'm sorry to disturb you, but Mr. Fentress asked me to tell you that the new truffle supplier called today. He left the documents in your office for you to review. Thank you, Helena, I nodded. I'll look at it after dinner. When she left, Merritt stared at me with her mouth open. Your office? Her voice was barely audible. What's going on here? Byrne looked equally stunned. Grandpa. I looked at both of them and said calmly, Amberley's is my restaurant. The same little restaurant that Vivian and I opened 30 years ago. Only it hasn't been small for a long time. Merritt turned pale. What? But you said... I didn't say anything, I said. You drew your own conclusions based on your prejudices. Byrne looked shocked. You own this restaurant? But why didn't you tell us? Did you ever ask? I looked him in the eye. In all these years, you've never once asked how things were going at Amberley's. To you, as to your parents, it was always just Grandpa's restaurant, something frivolous, insignificant. Merritt seemed to finally realize the situation. Her face went from pale to crimson. Yeah, I didn't know, she mumbled. Byrne never said. Because I didn't know, Byrne exclaimed. Grandfather, why did you keep it from us? I didn't hide anything, I answered calmly. I just wasn't bragging. Amberley's success is the result of years of hard work, love for the business, and adherence to the principles that Vivian and I have built upon. But it's always been something of a non-issue for your family. After all, what could be serious about the restaurant business, right? Merritt looked like she wanted to fall through the ground. Byrne looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. At that moment, Paxton returned with our desserts and coffee. He set them on the table with professional grace. Anything else, Mr. Shringwood? He asked. No, thank you, Paxton. Everything's fine. I smiled at him. When he left, Merritt was finally able to speak. Yeah, I apologize for what I said, Mr. Shringwood. I didn't mean to be rude, it's just, I didn't know. Obviously, I agreed. But you know, Merritt, this isn't about whether or not I own a restaurant. It's about how you judge people by their looks, their age, their perceived wealth. You don't see the person, you only see their status, their position, their usefulness to you. Byrne looked ashamed, as if my words applied to him too. Maybe it did. Grandfather, he began, but I held up my hand to stop him. I want to say something important, I said, looking directly at Merritt. Money comes and goes. Statuses change. What matters at the end of the day isn't the size of your bank account or the prestige of your position. It's the people you love and the cause you're committed to. I didn't build Amberley to impress people like you, Merritt. I built it because I loved cooking, loved creating a place where people can enjoy good food in each other's company. And I'm proud of what I've created, whether it impresses anyone or not. A silence ensued. Merritt stared into her coffee cup, hesitant to look up. Byrne looked thoughtful, as if digesting my words. I never thought of it that way, he said at last. To me, the restaurant had always been just a business, not a passion, not a calling. That's why you couldn't understand why I didn't sell it after Vivian died, I nodded. To all of you, it was just an asset to convert into money. To me, it was an extension of her and me. Our life, our love, our dreams. Merritt finally looked up. Mr. Shringwood, I am truly sorry for what I said. I was ignorant and rude. Yes, you were, I agreed without anger. But you know what? I'm grateful for this situation. It showed me who you really are, without filters or pretense. And that's valuable knowledge. There was silence at the table after my words. Byrne looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite define, a mixture of surprise, embarrassment, and perhaps admiration. Merritt stared into her cup of coffee, avoiding meeting my gaze. Her cheeks were still flaming with embarrassment, but I noticed something had changed in her eyes, a calculating glint that I didn't like at all. I sipped my coffee, giving them time to process the situation. Quiet jazz music was playing in the restaurant, providing a nice backdrop for the muted conversations at the other tables. No one around us was even aware of the little drama playing out at our table. Grandfather Byrne finally broke the silence. I don't even know what to say. Yeah, I'm ashamed I never took a real interest in your business. Don't blame yourself too much. I shrugged lightly. You were a kid when you left Amherst. And then, well, everyone has their own life. But still, he insisted, I should have known. I should have asked. Merritt finally looked up. Her face had taken on an expression of genuine remorse, but I'd been dealing with people too long not to recognize the falsity. Mr. Shringwood, her voice became soft, almost ingratiating. I do apologize for my behavior. It was unforgivably rude of me. We all make mistakes, I replied neutrally. Maybe, she paused, glancing at Byrne. Maybe you could show us the restaurant. I'd really like to see what you've created. Her abrupt change of tone did not escape my attention. Half an hour ago, she had looked at me like a poor old man who couldn't afford to dine in a nice restaurant. Now, after hearing about my situation, she was suddenly interested in my business. Of course, I nodded. I'd love to show you the inside of Amberley's. We finished our dessert, and I gestured to Paxton. The check, please. Certainly, Mr. Shringwood. He bowed and left. Let me pay, Byrne said quickly. It's the least I can do. No need, I shook my head. You're my guest tonight. When Paxton returned, I signed the bill without even looking at the amount and left a generous tip. Merritt watched with barely concealed interest. We got up from the table, and I led them through the dining room to an inconspicuous door in the far corner that led to the service area. As I passed other tables, I noticed many diners nodding respectfully, and the staff respectfully stepping aside to make way. This is where the backstage area of Amberley's begins, I said as I opened the door with my magnetic card. Here you go. We walked down a short hallway lined with offices for administration, accounting, and marketing. I stopped at a door labeled a Shringwood and opened it. My office, I ushered them in. The room was spacious with a large window overlooking a quiet patio. The walls were adorned with photographs. Amberley at various points in its existence, Vivian and I at the opening, our first employees, our first awards. On the massive oak table were fresh flowers and a few framed photos. One of us with Byrne as a child, when we made cookies together. Byrne walked over to the wall of photos, scrutinizing them. I didn't realize, he muttered, all these years. Meanwhile, Merritt looked around the study with an appraising eye. Expensive furniture, an antique table lamp, and a painting on the wall that was clearly not cheap. You have excellent taste, Mr. Shringwood, she said. It's a very elegant study. It's a credit to Vivian, I replied. She was always better at this sort of thing. I went to the bar in the corner of the room. Would you like a drink? Brandy, whiskey? Brandy, if that's okay, Byrne nodded. I'll have one too, thank you, Merritt added. I poured 3 glasses and suggested we sit in the chairs by the low coffee table. Once we were seated, I stared at Bjarne in silence for a while, noting how he had changed since the last time I'd seen him. There was the confidence of a mature man in his eyes, but today I could see a shadow of doubt there as well. After Vivian died, I began, deciding it was time for a frank conversation. I thought about selling the restaurant. Your mother persistently advised me to do so. Byrne nodded. She said it would be hard for you to run the business alone, especially at your age. It wasn't about age, I shook my head. Loris never realized that Amberley's wasn't just a business to Vivian and me. It was an extension of ourselves, our joint creation. I took a sip of brandy, feeling the warm liquid warm my throat. Do you know why we named the restaurant Amberley's? I asked Byrne. He shook his head. It was the name of the first child we lost, I said quietly. 2 years before Loris was born. The girl, Amber. She was born prematurely and lived only 3 days. Byrne looked shocked. Yeah, I didn't know. Mom never said. She doesn't know, I shrugged. Vivian and I decided not to tell her. Why burden a child with such sadness? But for us, Amberley's had always been more than just a restaurant. It was a dedication, a memory. Merritt listened with a sympathetic expression on her face, but I noticed that her eyes kept wandering around the room, assessing the furnishings, estimating the cost. When Vivian died, I continued, I felt it would be a betrayal to sell Amberley, not just to her memory, but to everything we believed in, everything we'd built together. Instead, I decided to grow the business, to make it even more successful, even more meaningful. And you succeeded, Burns said with genuine admiration. Yes, I nodded, but the price was high. I lost touch with my family. Your mother thought I was just clinging to the past, unwilling to move on. Toby had always looked down on me. For him, a restaurateur was a sort of serviceman, not a serious businessman. I looked Burns straight in the eye. And you were just distant, first physically when you moved, and then emotionally. Every year you became more like your parents, ambitious, career-oriented, with a clear idea of what was successful and what wasn't. Byrne lowered his eyes, recognizing the validity of my words. I remember when we used to cook together, he said quietly. Nah, you taught me how to make pasta from scratch. I was so proud when I was trusted to turn the knob of the pasta machine. You had a real talent, I smiled, an intuitive understanding of flavors that many professional chefs lack. But your parents, they wanted a serious career for me, Byrne finished for me. Finance, economics, something prestigious and safe. And you chose their path. I wasn't accusing, just stating a fact. I thought it was the right thing to do, he sighed. Everyone around him said the same thing. You need stability, career, status. Merritt squirmed slightly in her chair, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Reshimarn, but you've been successful in the end, she interjected. Amberley is clearly thriving. You must be a very wealthy man. I looked at her, noting how quickly she'd switched from apologizing to inquiring about my financial situation. Amberley is indeed successful, I confirmed neutrally. But like I said, it's not about the money. It's about creating something meaningful, something that will outlive you. I stood up, finishing my brandy. Come on, I'll show you the kitchen, the heart of any restaurant. We left the office and walked down the corridor to the large double doors behind which the kitchen was located. When I opened them, I let Byrne and Merritt go through. The Amberley kitchen was the epitome of modern technology and functionality. Gleaming stainless steel, the latest in appliances, spacious work surfaces. Despite the late hour, the place was still bustling with work. The cooks were preparing last orders, the assistants were washing dishes, the pastry chefs were arranging desserts. Wow, Byrne exhaled, looking around. This is impressive. Erwin Fentress, noticing us, gave his last orders to the sous chef and approached. Almir, he nodded to me, then turned his gaze to my companions. This is your grandson? Yes, Erwin. Meet Byrne, my grandson, and his wife Merritt. Byrne. Merritt, this is Erwin Fentress, our chef and an old friend of mine. Erwin shook Byrne's hand and gave Merritt a slight nod. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, he said to Byrne. Your grandfather has told me a lot about you. Has he? Byrne looked surprised. Of course, Erwin smiled. He always said you had a real talent for cooking, that you could be a great chef if you wanted to. Byrne gave me a quick glance that read, surprise and gratitude? Merritt looked around the kitchen with undisguised interest. Impressive equipment, she said. It must have cost a fortune. Quality requires investment, Erwin replied, frowning slightly. He had always been shrewd and seemed to recognize Merritt at once. But the results are worth it. There's a reason Amberley's is one of the top 10 restaurants in New England. Top 10? Merritt asked, her eyes widening. And that's just the beginning, Erwin winked at me. We have big plans, don't we, Almir? I nodded, not going into details. I didn't want to discuss future projects in front of Merritt, given her obvious interest in the financial side of things. We continued our tour of the kitchen. I showed them the cold rooms where the freshest products were stored, the pastry shop where our famous desserts were created, and the wine cellar with a collection of rare wines. In total, we employ 32 people, I said. Many of them have been with us for over 10 years. We are like a big family. Family, Byrne echoed, and I could hear a note of sadness in his voice. We went back to my office, and I offered them another glass of brandy. When we sat down again, Merritt leaned forward with an interested expression on her face. Mr. Shringwood, I have to say I'm impressed. What you've created here, it's amazing, and I sincerely regret my behavior earlier. I appreciate your words, Merritt, I replied, though I didn't believe they were sincere. You know, she took a sip of brandy. I work in marketing, and I think Amberley's has a lot of potential for expansion. A franchise, maybe? Or a line of branded products? This is it, I thought. The real reason for her sudden interest. We're already looking at various possibilities, I replied evasively. I could help, she offered quickly. I have experience working with prestigious brands. I know how to take a business to the next level. Byrne looked embarrassed by his wife's assertiveness. Merritt, maybe not now. No, this is important, she insisted. Your grandfather has created something amazing, and we could help him develop it further. Imagine, an Amberley's in Boston, New York, maybe even Los Angeles. I stared at her, amazed at how quickly she went from disdain to trying to cut into my business. Did she really think I couldn't see her true motives? It's an interesting proposition, Merritt, I said calmly. But Amberley is run according to a certain philosophy that Vivian and I have laid down from the beginning. Quality over quantity, personal attention to each guest, the uniqueness of the experience. Of course, she nodded vigorously. But that doesn't preclude expansion. You can retain all the values and still reach new markets. Maybe, I didn't argue. But right now I'm concentrating on developing this particular restaurant. Bjarne watched our conversation carefully, his gaze moving from me to Merritt and back again. I could see that he understood what was going on, and he was uncomfortable. Grandfather, he finally interjected, I just want to say that I admire what you've done, and I wish I had been a part of it, that I was alienated. There was a sincerity in his voice that was sorely lacking in Merritt's words. Thank you, Byrne. I smiled at him. It's never too late to change direction. What do you mean, he asked. I mean that life doesn't end with your chosen career. You can always discover something new, return to old hobbies, find something that really brings you joy. Merritt looked worried. Byrne is very successful in his field, she said quickly. He's got a bright future at Brighton Consulting, and with the offer from McKinsey, I'm not saying he should give up his career, I interrupted her. I'm talking about balance, about making time for the things that really matter. Byrne looked thoughtfully at the picture on the table, the one of us making cookies together. I'd almost forgotten what it was like, he said quietly. Cooking with you, creating something with your hands. You can always come back to it, I remarked. Not as a profession, if you don't want to, but as a hobby, as a way to express yourself. Merritt looked as if she wanted to object, but held back, apparently remembering her recent slip-up. I glanced at my watch. It's late. You're staying at the Amherst Inn, right? It's not far from here. Yes, Byrne nodded. We should probably get going. It's been, busy. We stood up. Byrne came over to me and, to my surprise, hugged me tightly for the first time in years. Thank you, Grandpa, he said, for showing me all this, and for not holding a grudge. Anger is a bad counselor, Byrne, patted him on the back. It's always good to see you. Merritt also came to say goodbye. Her handshake was much warmer now, and her smile was wider. It was so nice to get to know you better, Mr. Shringwood, she said. I hope we can continue to talk about possible collaborations. I'm sure my marketing skills could be of great use to Amberley. Perhaps, I smiled politely but discreetly. I walked them to the exit of the restaurant. The street was quiet, with only the occasional car passing by. The night air was cool and fresh after the heat of the day. We could meet tomorrow, Byrne suggested. Maybe we could have lunch together. I'd love to, I nodded. Come by 12. I'll show you our new menu. We said goodbye, and I watched them walk away down the street, Byrne, with a pensive expression, Merritt saying something animatedly to him. I couldn't hear their words, but I guessed from her gestures that she was already making plans for my restaurant and my fortune. Back in my office, I poured myself another brandy and sat in my chair, looking at the picture of Vivian on my desk. What would you do if you were me? I asked the photograph. Merritt is clearly only interested in money. Burn. Burn may be starting to have an epiphany, but he's still heavily influenced by his wife and parents. I sighed, remembering our conversation. Merritt's reaction didn't surprise me. People like her are always looking for an advantage. But Byrne, in his eyes, I saw glimpses of the boy I'd once known. Inquisitive, open, sincere. Perhaps all was not yet lost. I looked at my watch, almost midnight. The restaurant had already closed. The only people left were the janitors and the night guard. It was time to go home. But I couldn't stop thinking about tonight. What would tomorrow bring? Would Byrne be able to break free from the influence of his surroundings and find his own way? Or would Merritt convince him to use me and Amberly to his advantage? Time would tell, I thought, finishing my brandy. One thing I knew for sure was that I would no longer hide the truth about myself and my business. Let them see me as I am, with all my achievements and shortcomings, and let them make their own choices. I put the empty glass on the table and looked at Vivian's picture again. You always said the truth was liberating, I whispered. I hope you were right. I spent the night after dinner at the restaurant without sleep. I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the old floor clock downstairs. I got it from my father, and he got it from his father. A family heirloom, the guardian of time, which inexorably races forward, oblivious to our problems. In the morning, when the first rays of sunlight came through the curtains, I was already on my feet. I made a strong cup of coffee and went out into the backyard. The garden that Vivian had once tended still looked tidy, thanks to the gardener I hired twice a week. But something was missing. Her touch, her love for each plant. The same question kept running through my mind. What to do about my family? Forgive their years of neglect and try to build new relationships? Or accept that some ties are not worth rebuilding? Byrne had clearly changed after last night. In his eyes, I saw genuine surprise, respect, and perhaps regret for lost time. But Merritt, her sudden interest in my business was all too transparent. She saw not an opportunity to get closer to her husband's family, but a potential profit. A phone call interrupted my musings. It was Byrne. Good morning, Grandpa. Didn't wake you? I haven't slept in a long time, I answered. Something wrong? No, it's just, I thought maybe we could get together today. Just the two of us. He emphasized the last word. Sure. What do you suggest? How about we just walk around town? It's been so long since I've been to Amherst. We agreed to meet at Central Park at 11 o'clock. As I hung up the phone, I felt a slight thrill. Byrne wanted to see me without Merritt, so he had something to say to me alone. 3 hours later, I was sitting on a bench by the fountain. The spring day was unusually warm, and the townspeople were pouring into the park, young mothers with strollers, elderly couples, students with books. Life buzzed around me, reminding me that the world was not limited to my problems. Byrne showed up at 11 sharp, dressed much simpler than usual, jeans, a t-shirt, a light jacket. Without his business suit, he looked younger, more like the boy I remembered. Grandpa, he hugged me without the awkwardness he'd had before. Thank you for agreeing to meet me. It's always good to see you, I replied sincerely. How is Merritt? Didn't want to join us? She's in a meeting with a client. I could hear the tension in his voice. To be honest, I didn't ask her to come. I wanted to talk to you without her. We walked slowly down the paths of the park. Bjarne was silent, as if gathering his thoughts. I must apologize, he said at last, for Merritt's behavior yesterday, and for all these years of not taking the time to see you. You have nothing to apologize for, I shook my head. You're a grown man with your own life. Yes, I do, he said insistently. I let my parents convince me that their way was the only way. Career, status, money. All of that became more important than family, more important than real relationships. We approached a lake where ducks swam. Byrne absent-mindedly tossed them some breadcrumbs he'd taken out of his pocket. You know, I still have that knife, he said suddenly. What knife? I didn't understand. The chef's knife, the one you gave me for my 8th birthday. I smiled, remembering. It was a small but real chef's knife, specially ordered from a craftsman. Vivian had grumbled at the time that it was a dangerous gift for a child, But I'd insisted Byrne had to learn to work with real tools. You were so proud when you got it, I said. You couldn't part with it for a week, even wanted to sleep with it under your pillow. Mom confiscated it when she found out, Byrne grinned. But then she gave it back. I still have it. Sometimes I take it out when I'm cooking a special meal. Do you really cook? I asked with interest. You don't just heat up convenience foods? I do, and quite often, he nodded. It, it helps me relax after work. Forget about numbers, reports, meetings. Just create something with my hands. In his voice, I heard the same feeling that had once led me into cooking, a love of the process of creation, of transforming simple ingredients into something special. Does Merritt know about your hobby? Of course she does, but she doesn't understand, he sighed. For her, it's just a way to impress her guests at home dinners. Just another tool to build the right connections. We sat on a bench overlooking the lake. In the distance, we could see the boathouse where we once rented a boat, and I taught him how to row. Byrne, what's going on between you two? I asked bluntly. Shakfa stormilam. I see that yesterday you were arguing about more than just my restaurant. He was silent for a long time, looking at the water. Then he said quietly, Merritt and I, we have different ways of looking at life. It's getting harder and harder to ignore that. When you were married, were these differences not so noticeable? They were, but I thought I could accept her approach, that I could be just as ambitious, just as driven, just as focused on success. I really tried, Grandpa. Working overtime, taking on extra projects, and striving for a promotion. He shook his head. But the more I achieved, the emptier I felt. What about Merritt? Is she happy with her path? She seems to be. For her, life is a constant upward spiral. More money, more connections, more power, more prestigious address, more expensive car. He grinned sadly. Do you know what she said when she heard about your restaurant? Lucky at last. Now we can use these connections to promote ourselves. Use it, I interjected, even though I already knew the meaning. She'd already made a list of people to invite to Amberley's as special guests of the owner's family. Potential clients, CEOs of companies where she wanted contracts. I shook my head. That approach was foreign to me. Amberley's had always been a place where the quality of the food and the atmosphere spoke for itself. We never used connections to attract customers. We had a serious conversation last night, Byrne continued, or rather a fight. She thinks I should convince you to turn Amberley's into a chain of restaurants with her in charge of marketing. She says it's a crime to pass up the opportunity. What do you think? I asked, watching his reaction carefully. I think she doesn't understand what Amberley's is all about. She doesn't understand that it's not just a business, but your life's work, a monument to your and your grandmother's love. He looked me in the eye. I told her I wouldn't push you, that I respect your vision and your decisions. And how did she react? Shh, she was furious, and he smiled crookedly. Said I was as stubborn an old man as my grandfather. That I didn't understand the potential, didn't see the possibilities. That I was wasting my talent on unpromising work, and now I was giving up a chance to change things. I stared at the lake in silence, digesting what I'd heard. So Merritt saw my restaurant not just as a successful business, but as an opportunity for her own advancement, and was willing to use her husband to gain access to my fortune. This fight, is it more serious than the previous ones? I asked cautiously. Byrne was silent for a long time, then said quietly, I don't know if our relationship has a future, Grandfather. It's as if we're moving in opposite directions. She's only interested in the trappings of success, and I'm realizing more and more that I want something else. What is it? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. I want to do what I really love. Cook not just for myself and my friends, but professionally. Maybe open a small cafe or restaurant. Nothing huge, just my own place. He smiled embarrassedly. Sounds naive, doesn't it? No, I shook my head. It sounds like a dream, a real dream, coming from the heart, not from a desire to impress others. We were quiet for a moment. A flock of birds flew over the lake, heading south. Somewhere in the distance, music was playing. Apparently, street musicians were giving an impromptu concert. Grandfather, Byrne said suddenly, I want to ask you something. Of course, I nodded. What is it? Merit will probably try to contact you directly, offering deals, partnerships, investments, anything to get access to your business. Please be careful. You think she'll go that far? I was surprised. Try to get around you? I'm sure she will, he grinned wryly. When Merit sees a goal, she goes after it any way she can. It's a quality that's helped her in her career. But in her personal relationships, he didn't finish, but I understood. People like Merit often succeed in business precisely because of their determination and lack of sentimentality. But those same qualities make them difficult partners in their personal lives. Don't worry, I put my hand on his shoulder. I've been around long enough to recognize people's true motives. Byrne looked relieved. Thank you, grandfather. I was afraid you might think I was jealous or trying to control the situation. I know you're not, I said confidently. You're not looking out for your own interests. You're looking out for mine. And I appreciate that. We stood up and slowly walked further into the park. The conversation drifted to lighter topics. Memories of his childhood, funny stories about the restaurant, plans for the future. Byrne asked me about the secrets behind certain dishes, and I shared recipes and techniques. At one point, I caught myself thinking that we were talking as if these years of estrangement hadn't happened. Just grandfather and grandson bonded by a shared passion for cooking. By the time we left the park, it was past noon. Byrne suggested we stop at a small cafe on the corner for coffee and a snack. We ordered sandwiches and cappuccinos, and he went on to talk about his life in Boston. You know what the weirdest thing is? He said, stirring his coffee. I hold a high position, I make a good salary, I'm respected by my coworkers. I'm successful by every standard. But every morning I wake up feeling like I'm living someone else's life. That's a difficult realization. I nodded. Many people go through it. What would you do if you were me, Grandpa? I wondered. It was a difficult question. I didn't want to give advice that might ruin his life. But I didn't want to lie either. I would ask myself one question, I finally said. If I had only 1 year to live, how would I want to spend it? Doing what I'm doing now? Or something completely different? Byrne froze with the cup to his lips. That's a very direct way of prioritizing, he said after a pause. Vivian taught me that, I smiled, remembering. When we were questioning whether or not we should put all our savings into opening Amberley, she asked us that very question. And we both knew the answer. What if my answer meant a big change? Perhaps painful for some people. Then you have some hard choices to make. I looked him in the eye. But remember, to live someone else's life is to die slowly every day. He nodded, deep in thought. At that moment, his cell phone rang. Byrne looked at the screen and wrinkled his nose slightly. Merit, he explained. She must be back at the hotel, looking for me. He accepted the call, and I heard an agitated female voice on the other end. Byrne answered briefly, looking out the window with an absent expression. Yeah, I'm with my grandfather. Just taking a walk? Talking? No, we didn't discuss business. Yeah, I'll be there in half an hour. When he hung up, he looked upset. I have to go, he said in an apologetic tone. Merit wants me to go back to the hotel. She has some news. Of course, I nodded understandingly. Will I see you again before you leave? We will, he said confidently. We're here until Sunday. Tomorrow? Tomorrow's great, I smiled. Maybe you'll stop by the restaurant. Erwin will be glad to show you the kitchen. If you want, you can even take part in the cooking. His eyes lit up like a child being offered a long-awaited gift. Really? You're not kidding. Of course I'm not kidding. Erwin always said you had talent. As we were saying goodbye outside, Byrne gave me a big hug. Thanks for talking to me, Grandpa, for listening, and for not judging me. You have nothing to thank me for. I patted him on the back. Just remember, whatever you decide, I'll support you. As I watched him walk down the street tall, like me in my youth, but with a certain uncertainty in his gait, I had mixed feelings. On the one hand, joy at reconnecting with my grandson. On the other, anxiety about his future. Merit was clearly not going to back down from her plans, and the conflict between them could only intensify. As I drove home, I pondered my role in all of this. Should I try to reconcile them? Or should I support Bernie in his desire for change, even if it meant breaking up with Merit? And what about Merit herself, who would surely try to use me for her own ends? One thing was certain. I would no longer stay out of my grandson's life. Too much time had already been lost. If fate had given us a second chance, I wasn't going to miss it. Saturday morning was unexpectedly cool for May. Clouds covered the sky, promising rain by noon. I stood at the window of my office in the restaurant, watching the passers-by going about their business. Many with umbrellas at the ready. Yesterday's conversation with Bjarni had been on my mind. His candor, his inner conflict, his unconcealed longing for a different life, all of it made me rethink my own attitude toward my family and the future of Amberley. The office door opened, and Erwin walked in with 2 cups of coffee. "You look thoughtful," he said, handing me one of the cups. "Something to think about." I nodded gratefully and took a sip. "Bern called," Erwin said. "Asked if he could come over early to help with dinner prep." I smiled. It seemed that last night's conversation had affected Bern as much as it had me. "What did you say to him?" "I told him he was welcome anytime," Erwin said with a sly smile, "and that I have a special ravioli recipe I've been wanting to pass on to someone for a long time." "You want to train him?" I raised an eyebrow. "Why wouldn't I? The kid's got talent, always has. Remember when he made that mushroom risotto when he was 10? No recipe, just a gut feeling." I nodded, remembering. Bern had insisted that his dish be served to the guests, and everyone had been delighted, not knowing that a child had made it. Vivian had said he had a natural flair for cooking, I said quietly, that he needed to develop it. And she was right, as always, Erwin sipped his coffee. "So what's going on with him? Why the sudden interest in the kitchen?" I briefly told him about yesterday's conversation, about Bern's doubts, his dissatisfaction with his present life, and his growing conflict with Merritt. "And Merritt herself? Is she coming too?" Erwin asked when I had finished. "I don't think so. Bern said she was busy with some meetings." I shrugged. "Honestly, I'm kind of glad. I don't want her to interfere with our communication with our grandson. She doesn't strike me as the kind of person who backs down easily," Erwin said. "That's true," I sighed. "I'm sure she's already making plans to use my position and connections." "What are you going to do?" I wondered, looking at the portrait of Vivian on the wall. "What would she advise in a situation like this?" "I've made my decision," I said at last. "I'm going to tell Bern today." Erwin didn't ask anything, just nodded. Over the years of friendship, he'd learned to respect my need to keep my thoughts to myself until they were fully formed. "Well, let's get ready for your grandson." He finished his coffee and stood up. "I'll get the ingredients for the ravioli." When he left, I sat for a while thinking about the upcoming conversation. What I was about to propose to Bern could completely change his life and mine too. But sometimes the riskiest decisions turn out to be the right ones. At 11:30, there was a knock on the door, and Helena came into the office. "Mr. Shringwood, your grandson is here." I took him to the kitchen to see Chief Fentress. "Thank you, Elena. I'll be right with you." I gathered the papers on the desk, locked the safe, and headed for the kitchen. As I walked through the restaurant area, I noted that the staff was already finishing setting the tables for dinner. Everything looked immaculate: white tablecloths, gleaming silverware, fresh flowers and vases. Little things like that were always important to Vivian, and I kept the tradition alive. The kitchen was in its usual pre-dinner bustle, with cooks preparing sauces and side dishes, sous chefs chopping vegetables and meats, and pastry chefs working on desserts. But at the center of all this chaos stood Erwin and Bern, leaning over a work table sprinkled with flour. Bern, dressed in a white apron and chef's hat, was listening intently to Erwin's explanation of how to properly roll out the dough for the ravioli. I stopped in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt the lesson. As I watched my grandson's focused face, his confident movements, I experienced a strange sense of déjà vu. Years ago, he had stood there, following my instructions, his eyes burning with the same enthusiasm. Erwin noticed me and nodded, but went on with his explanation. Bern was so absorbed in the process that he didn't get distracted. I watched as he carefully folded circles of dough filled with filling, carefully sealing the edges to create perfect crescent ravioli. "Well done," Erwin said at last, appreciating the result. "You've got a natural talent, boy. Your hands remember, even if your head has forgotten." Bern looked up and saw me. "Grandpa," his face lit up with a smile. "Erwin is teaching me how to make ravioli with ricotta and spinach. It's an amazing recipe. I see you've picked up your skills quickly. I walked over to the table, looking at the neat rows of ravioli. It looks great. Not as good as Irwin's. Burns shook his head. But I try. Modest, Irwin winked at me. I rarely see such smooth ravioli, even with experienced cooks. Byrne blushed at the praise, and at that moment he looked just like the boy I'd once taught to bake cookies. When you're done, come to my office, I said. We need to talk. Is it serious? Byrne looked worried. Just a conversation, I smiled to reassure him. Finish the ravioli. They mustn't dry out. I went back to my office and began to prepare for the upcoming conversation. I took out of the safe a folder with the documents I had prepared last night, reread them, made sure everything was in order. Half an hour later, the door opened and Byrne and Irwin walked in. The ravioli is in good hands, Irwin said. My sous chef will look after them. They'll be ready for dinner. Good, I pointed to the chairs across from my desk. Have a seat, both of you. They sat down, and I noticed that Byrne looked both excited and relaxed, a strange combination that happens when you're nervous, but still doing what you love to do. How is Merritt? I asked, deciding to start from afar. Sam, she's fine, Byrne said with a slight wince. She's in a meeting with a potential client. Organic cosmetics, remember? I remember, I nodded. Did you talk a lot about the restaurant last night? Byrne hesitated, and I realized I'd guessed. She was suggesting all sorts of partnerships, franchises, joint ventures, even buying a stake in the business. And what did you tell her? That it's your business and only you can make those decisions. Byrne looked me in the eye. That I wouldn't influence you or use our family ties. Was she displeased? That's putting it mildly. He grinned bitterly. She thinks I'm missing a golden opportunity, that if it weren't for my sentimentality, we could have monetized the family ties. Irwin snorted. Monetize family ties? That's kind of cynical. It's Merritt, Byrne said simply, and there was more explanation in those two words than in a long speech. I opened the folder I had prepared and took out the documents. I've made a decision about the future of Amberley, I said, and I want to share it with both of you. Byrne tensed, and Irwin stepped forward, clearly intrigued. I've been thinking a lot about what's going on with our family, with you, Byrne, and with the restaurant, I began, and I've come to the conclusion that we can't go on living as if nothing has changed. You can't pretend that our relationship with Loris and Toby will ever be warm and close. And you can't ignore the fact that your marriage to Merritt doesn't seem to be built on the kind of foundations that can lead to happiness. Byrne lowered his eyes but did not object. I continued. At the same time, I can see that your passion for cooking has not waned, that you still find joy in creating dishes, in working in the kitchen. And I can see that your current career is not satisfying. That's true, he confirmed quietly, but I don't know what to do about it. I have commitments, loans. I have a proposal. I put the documents in front of him. I'd like to offer you a partnership in Amberley. Not just an employee, but a co-owner with a 25% stake to start, with the possibility of increasing it in the future. Byrne stared dazedly at the papers. A partner? But how? Why? Because you're talented, I answered simply. Because Amberley was created with love, and only a man who understands that can continue its story. And because you're my grandson, and I want you to be happy. But I can't just quit my job, move to Amherst. Not right away, I raised my hand. It'll be a gradual process. First, you can come up on weekends, learn from Irwin, get up to speed on the business. Then when you're ready, you can go full-time. Irwin, who had been silent until then, added, I've been telling Almir for a long time that we need a fresh set of eyes, a new generation, and I'd be happy to pass on my knowledge to someone who really loves this business. Burns shifted his gaze from me to Irvine and back again, clearly trying to comprehend the offer. What about Merritt? He finally asked. She'll never agree to move to Amherst, and she expects me to become a partner in Brighton Consulting. Byrne, I said softly, this offer is only for you. Not Merritt, not Loris, not Toby. Only you, and the decision must be yours alone. He understood what I meant. His face became serious. You're offering me a choice between my family and my passion? I'm asking you to choose a life that makes you happy. I looked into his eyes. Sometimes that requires leaving behind people who are pulling you in a different direction. A silence ensued. Byrne was looking at the papers, but didn't seem to see them. Irvine tactfully stood up. I'm going to go check on our ravioli, he said. Let me know when you're done talking. When the door closed behind him, Byrne finally looked up at me. Do you know that this could mean the end of my marriage? I'm guessing, I nodded. But think about this. If your marriage can't survive your decision to do what you love, is it worth keeping? Byrne was silent for a long time, pondering my words. Then he said quietly, Merritt and we've been drifting apart for a long time. This visit to Amherst only brought to light problems that had existed for years. She never understood what was important to me. She always thought my cooking hobbies were a waste of time. And you're willing to spend the rest of your life like that? I asked. Hiding your true passions? Pretending to be someone else? No, he shook his head. I can't do that anymore. Especially after these days here. After I've felt what it's like to create something with my own hands again. He took the documents and began to scrutinize them. I didn't rush him. This was a big decision that needed time. It says here that I have to train under a chef for a year before I can make decisions about the menu, he said. That's Irwin's suggestion, I nodded. He says talent is talent, but technique and experience are necessary. You can come in on weekends, get trained gradually. And where will I live when I move permanently? He asked, and I caught a note of decision in his voice. There's plenty of room in my house, I smiled. Or you can get an apartment in the city if you want more independence. Eventually, you might want to buy your own house. Byrne nodded, continuing to read. When he reached the end, he looked up. You're seriously willing to give me a quarter of your business? Just like that? Not for nothing, I countered. For your talent, your dedication, your willingness to learn and work. And besides, I'm not going to live forever. Someone will have to carry on the Amberley business when I'm gone. I'd like it to be you. His eyes glittered suspiciously. I don't know what to say, grandfather. It's an incredible offer. Then don't say anything. I held out a pen to him. Just sign it if you're sure it's what you really want. He took the pen but hesitated. I need to talk to Merritt. I can't make a decision like this behind her back. Of course, I nodded. It's the right thing to do. But remember, this is your life, your future. Don't let anyone else decide for you. When do you need an answer? The papers will be waiting for you here. I took the papers and put them back in the folder. Decide for as long as it takes. A week, a month, a year. I'm in no hurry. He looked relieved. Thank you, grandfather, for understanding and for the chance. You're welcome. I stood up. Now, why don't we go back to the kitchen? I think our ravioli's ready. When the door closed behind us, I realized that for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. Whatever choice Byrne had made, I had offered him a path that was consistent with my values and principles. I stayed true to myself by not compromising with Merritt or trying to repair my relationship with Loris and Toby at the cost of my own dignity. Amberley's had always been not just a restaurant, but the embodiment of love, mine and Vivian's. And if Byrne accepts my offer, that love will live on into the next generation with new energy and vision. And if not, well, I've lived long enough to know that true freedom comes when you live in harmony with yourself, even if that means being alone. And there is beauty and power in that freedom.